The Dark Tournament arc was the peak of Yu Yu Hakusho. It was by far the most popular and iconic arc in the entire series, but unfortunately, it also left its author Yoshihiro Togashi burnt out as well, as at this point in his career, Togashi had started feeling the negative side effects of publishing a weekly manga, which negatively affected his life and work, to the point where he wanted to end the series. But these feelings also carried over to the characters and storytelling of Yu Yu Hakusho, and created one of my personal favorite arcs in the entire series. So if you haven't been keeping up, we've been dissecting every arc inside of Yu Yu Hakusho, and today we're going to be tackling the Chapter Black arc. During the Dark Tournament, Togashi had reached his limit with the series, and similarly, Yusuke had reached the limits of his power after his fight with Toguro. And I believe this aimless and purposeless Yusuke is a reflection of what Togashi must have been feeling at the time. This search for meaning is something that Togashi is going to explore heavily in this arc and for the rest of this series publication, both inside and outside of the story. The Toguro fight reached the power ceiling of the series, with Yusuke defeating and surpassing the strongest living being in the human world. Years prior, Togashi's contemporary in Shonen Jump had faced the same problem. His story also had a very limited power system, and after riding a battle with the strongest being in the verse, he had to take a different path. That's when Hirohiko Araki decided to introduce stands to the third part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Stands are a very soft and diverse power system. It simply is a visual manifestation of psychic and spiritual abilities and phenomena, which can range all the way from the manipulation of space-time to cooking a very nutritious meal. The genius of stands is that it turned the vertical power progression of the series horizontal, meaning that instead of having to introduce stronger and stronger villains, Araki can just use trickier opponents that require strategy to overcome. That's not to say that there aren't stands that are stronger than others, it just means that Araki can introduce a diverse array of antagonists that all pose a unique threat, which suits him perfectly as a hyper-creative discovery writer. Now this video didn't just turn into a JoJo dissection, that video is going to come eventually. This is all relevant because Yoshihiro Togashi decided to take this idea and implement it into his own story with the introduction of territories. Togashi had said that he got the idea of territories from a sci-fi novel, but it was mostly his parody of stands from JoJo. At the time he said that he was accused of plagiarism by readers, but personally I think that adopting this concept into his series was the best decision he's ever made. Like I said before, this brand of power system diversifies and flattens the power curve of the series, which helps combat power creep. This is illustrated perfectly in the first conflict of the arc, by having Yusuke be defeated and captured by human territory users, who physically he is tiers above, but he loses simply because he was being careless. When Kurama, Hiei, Kuwabara, and Botan arrive to Yusuke's rescue, the territories make a physical conflict that the crew could easily win not an option, and our main characters have to engage the territory users in a battle of wits. This was so refreshing on my first time watching. As much as I liked the Dark Tournament, a break from the constant brawls was very necessary to keep the series fresh, before reintegrating the meathead battle aspects in the climax of this arc. Although I think stands are a much better, utilized and fleshed out power system, territories are implemented into the story much better by not completely erasing the old system. The protagonists of JoJo almost completely stopped using Haman after the second part, instead wielding simplistic stand abilities so that their use of strategy is clearer. But Yu Yu Hakusho retains its old power system of Reiki, so our protagonists don't have to get new powers, as their old powers are already established and simple, which allows them to outsmart and punish the villains in a cathartic way, similar to in JoJo. And also, stands pretty much just popped up out of nowhere in the JoJo universe when part 3 started. Territories, on the other hand, actually have a reason why they're just starting to show up so late into the series. Someone is carrying on Sakyo's ambitions and has started drilling a hole into the demon world. From this hole comes spirit energy that turns humans into psychic territory users, but more importantly, it will allow the passage of powerful high-ranked demons if completed. Koenma reveals that Toguro was only a Class B demon, and while I dislike when past villains are made to seem weaker, this revelation of A and S class demons existing far more powerful than Toguro really expands the horizon of the world. In this arc they're described more like primordial, kaiju-like beings, as opposed to the small-time yokai that we've been seeing so far. The crew have 3 weeks to stop the tunnel from being completed and to prevent a full-on demon apocalypse. The Chapter Black arc starts off much better than the Dark Tournament arc, because it expands naturally on the concept that we've been introduced to, like the Demon World Tunnel, and it feels like a more natural escalation of stakes, as opposed to the Dark Tournament, which feels like it was just dropped onto the protagonists. Most importantly though, I think its early fights are much more interesting because it borrowed the power systems from JoJo as well as the story structure, with our protagonists encountering and fighting these strange ability users, one-on-one and one at a time, before fighting the boss. This is best shown by what I think is one of the best fights in the entire series. Every scene is a mini story that consists of a setup in the beginning, a confrontation in the middle, and a resolution at the end. A fight scene is no different, but it's just using action as the medium of the plot. But when Araki introduced stands to part 3 of JoJo, he also added the element of mystery to each fight, combining a thrilling puzzle with bombastic action. Togashi doesn't use this formula consistently like Araki, but he uses it in this fight, giving it one of the most unique tones in the entire series. The crew find themselves in a hospital, which is the territory of one of Sensui's 7, the Doctor. There's a dramatic irony here, where the audience knows who the Doctor is, but Yusuke is left in the dark, making him seem much more vulnerable. Togashi makes an effort to showcase every character's territory in this fight, and the Doctor probably has one of the most cool and versatile territories, as with most Doctor characters, let's be honest. The Doctor can change his body's chemistry to increase his strength and nullify pain, making it so that it's practically impossible to defeat him without killing him. And this puts Yusuke in a moral dilemma of either killing the Doctor or allowing his friends to die. The first time I watched this, I thought it was kind of forced to have Yusuke be reluctant to kill when he has killed demons countless of times before. But when you factor in what Sensui was trying to prove, it makes so much sense. Now if Yusuke makes the simple leap of killing a human because they are evil, the same way he would kill a demon, that would put him one step closer to Sensui's ideology. Because at that point, all it would take for Yusuke to devalue human life is to convince Yusuke that humans are just as bad as demons, which can easily be done with the chapter black tape. We can assume this is what happened to the Doctor. It wouldn't be unrealistic for a surgeon to be a bit psychopathic already, but only the chapter black could make a man so deranged to the point that they would want the extinction of humanity. Like, I'm genuinely surprised that he didn't go down the old humanity is a disease angle, as he is a doctor after all. Yusuke makes the decision to kill the Doctor, but this is undercut by Genkai saving him, which I really dislike. Genkai even being alive and here at this point in the story really shows how much Togashi diminishes death in the series. If Togashi followed through with the consequences and allowed Yusuke to kill the Doctor, I don't think it would completely shatter Yusuke's morals because he didn't really have a choice, but it will strengthen Sensui's argument like I explained before, which would make the arc's philosophical conflict a bit more interesting. I wish we could have seen a little bit more of the Doctor and his descent into insanity, but I think he served as an extreme case, and the next of the Sensui 7 that we see shows how a regular person like you and I can be turned against our own kind. This fight mostly focuses on Kuwabara, who is still auraless since the Dark Tournament. After coming back late from a concert, he and his friends are ambushed in the rain by one of Sensui's 7, the Seaman, Mitarai, who can use water as golems to fight for him. In this fight, Mitarai acts like a bully, and from what we can gather from Mitarai's appearance and backstory, he appears to be a foreigner to Japan, and that is likely the cause of the bullying that he received. That experience would already give somebody a pessimistic view on human nature, but along with being forced to watch the chapter black tape, it makes sense why Mitarai would believe that human nature is intrinsically evil. Unlike the Doctor, who's an insane psychopath, Mitarai is a lot more relatable and shows how an average person can be consumed by a dark ideology. But Kuwabara reawakens his powers and shatters both Mitarai's ability and ideology, and that's because it really isn't an ideology. Mitarai had just been falling deeper and deeper into this void until Kuwabara pulls him out by saving him alongside of his other friends. This really shows how flimsy this ideology is, where one act of good can overcome thousands of hours of programmed evil. One thing that I'll give Togashi credit for over Araki is that he figured out much faster how to implement the villain of the week power system and story structure into a larger serialized story. Up until about part 5, a large chunk of the stand encounters in JoJo could be completely skipped without missing out on much of the overall story. But the way that these two authors fixed this problem is by adding something in each of these mini story arcs that moves the overall story forward bit by bit. And the most powerful example of this is the midpoint in the middle of the arc that introduces the main villain. we're finally introduced to the primary antagonist, Shinobu Sensui, the man behind the Demon Tunnel plan. And we get the revelation that he's a former spirit detective before Yusuke and is 2 days away from finishing the tunnel. And he demonstrates his superior experience to Yusuke by picking him apart in a fight before kidnapping Kuwabara. Kuwabara's newly awakened spirit sword being the MacGuffin of the plot, and what Sensui needs to cut the spirit net to complete his plan, was an unexpected twist, but it's a great midpoint twist because now that he's kidnapped and Yusuke is defeated, the plot is completely flipped on its head, and now the heroes are on the back foot and they have 2 days left before the tunnel is completed. The sniper has probably one of the coolest abilities out of the Sensui 7. He can create targets out of his aura on his target, and everything that he throws infused with his aura will hit its target. And abilities like this is why I think the first 2 acts of the Chapter Black arc are superior to that of the Dark Tournament. The Dark Tournament was a series of back-to-back fights with only minor variations to the formula. I mean, I did like Chu and Jin, but their fights were pretty similar at the end of the day, and neither of them put Yusuke in such a uniquely vulnerable position. Unfortunately, we don't get much from the sniper or a satisfying conclusion because this fight is ended by Hiei, who was reintroduced to the story arc. I wish we got as much out of the sniper Hagiri as we did with the other Sensui 7 members, but instead we get a brief skirmish between Yusuke and Hiei, which honestly felt like Togashi just added it to cater to the fans. But Yusuke convinces Hiei to join the group and help out in exchange for keeping the Chapter Black for himself. Hiei thinks it over for a bit and he eventually accepts. But what I think is interesting is that while Hiei acted indifferent when the portal was first opened, I think he had been deciding whether or not he wanted to help Yusuke, and he felt a bit conflicted about whether he wanted to return home to Demon World or stay with his friends in the human world. I mean, you can say this is my headcanon because this part of the story really isn't explored from Hiei's perspective, and it really isn't until the next arc where Hiei's actions are put into context and we get to see his backstory. And I think he needs to be decoded in his own video by himself, because once you're able to look past his standoffish attitude, you can really see what motivates him. The Gamemaster fight has to be one of the most underrated fights in the entire series, because of how it effectively showcases the villain's manipulation skills and his philosophical argument without it being a direct conflict. The group entered the cave where the tunnel is being created to confront Sensui, but blocking their way is the Gamemaster Amanuma, whose territory allows him to manifest video games in real life. Now in the manga they always play using arcade machines, but in the anime it's inconsistent if the players are controlling their characters or if they are their characters. And I think the latter is more interesting since transporting into a video game feels more like a psychic territory ability than a glorified arcade, especially since the consequences of the game are very real. If your player dies, you die as well, which makes it so insidious that Sensui told Amanuma to play Goblin City, a game where the players play a series of mini-games against the Goblin King played by Amanuma, and if the players lose, they must either play again or it's game over and they all die like their characters. But if they win, the final cutscene of the game has the Goblin King dying, which will kill Amanuma as a result. This really shows how manipulative and far gone Sensui is. Amanuma didn't have the best relationship with his parents and school in general, and that's probably why he was so consumed by video games, as it was probably his only escape. And Sensui preyed on that. Instead of helping him obtain things that a kid could actually need, like a parental figure, he ironically serves as Amanuma's father or like bigger brother figure, while encouraging him to indulge in his childish fantasies, all because it would help him with his goal of world destruction. Sensui almost seems as evil as the devil himself, with how manipulative and cunning he is while having such senseless and evil motives. But the real purpose of having Amanuma on his side is to use him as a sacrificial pawn to put Team Urameshi in an ethical dilemma similar to the trolley problem, with Amanuma on one side and humanity on the other. That is meant to stall the group, but both Sensui and Kurama realize that they would have to make the choice eventually, since the game can only come to an end with either Amanuma dead or Yusuke's group dead, which would cause the destruction of the entire world. But by having Amanuma be killed, Sensui was making a bigger moral argument, similar to how Yusuke had chose whether or not to kill the doctor. By pulling the trolley lever and sacrificing Amanuma, Kurama has chosen the utilitarian ethical argument, which is stating that sacrificing a few to serve the greater good of many is the correct choice. But then would that make Sensui's choice of sacrificing the human race to allow demons to thrive the correct choice as well? The story really doesn't explore the ethics of demons eating humans until the next arc, but by having the reader even slightly uncertain about whether Sensui is wrong is an incredible feat due to how unbelievably evil his actions seem. And you can see how that, along with witnessing the chapter black tape, can push somebody over the edge. This mini arc really puts you in the shoes of our protagonist, especially Kurama, and the timing couldn't be better as the group have arrived at Sensui's headquarters. The group arrives in Sensui's cave, and at this point the gatekeeper and the one who's carving the tunnel, Itsuki, doesn't even need to do anything for the tunnel to be completed. The gourmet steps up to fight Kurama. He gets completely spliced, and it's revealed that the elder Toguro had gained control of his body. While it's not directly against Sensui, Kurama takes his vengeance out on the elder Toguro by planting a plan on him, which puts him in an illusion for eternity. The elder Toguro is reintroduced and defeated so quickly in this arc that it's almost pointless for him to be here, but he's also really the one who brings the story of the Dark Tournament arc and the Chapter Black arc together. In a series of cause and effect, Toguro kicking the elder Toguro away into the sea caused him to send out signals with his dark energy to attract somebody, and that was Sensui, which probably led to the elder Toguro telling Sensui all about Sakyo's ambitions for the demon portal. One thing I like about Sensui is that he has the strength and presence of Toguro paired with the cunning and evil mind of Sakyo. Conceptually, he's my favorite villain in the entire series, and we get to dive deeper into Sensui's psyche as Itsuki uses its power over dimensional demons to isolate Yusuke and Sensui for their final battle. The Boss. The last segment of this arc has a lot of good stuff, having some of the most intriguing concepts in the entire series, but also there's some mediocre execution of the ideas, which, like I said at the very beginning, we can attribute to Togashi's mindset while writing this. This is the point in the story where Togashi desperately wanted to end the series, but wasn't allowed to by the Jump publishers, and this really puts the dialogue between Sensui and Yusuke before their fight into context. Sensui explains that both being a spirit detective and his tunnel back to Demon World were both just to facilitate his desire to fight, and Yusuke actually agrees with that. He feels saving people as a spirit detective was just a bonus on top of his real desire to fight as well, and they both don't even care at this point about the tunnel opening. With Yusuke, I find it strange that Togashi alleviated the responsibility for him killing the doctor before, but now he's starting to get really unhinged, which is a very weird switch. It's as if Togashi had abandoned his obligation to keep his story shonen-like. You can really see Togashi inserting his own struggle of being a Shonen Jump author, as he has to constantly create a story with reasons to facilitate a fight to satisfy the readers of Jump. But Togashi is much more Sensui than Yusuke in this case, because they both really want the world of Yu Yu Hakusho to end if you really think about it. He even says himself in an interview that at this point in the story, he had fully developed his protagonist, so he started writing himself into his villains instead. I'm definitely not going to pretend that Togashi's overexertion and bad mental health is a good thing, or romanticize the tortured artist stereotype, but I really do think from an artistic standpoint, Togashi was able to express his negative emotions to create what I think is a very interesting and impersonal story. I've heard before that fiction can give you a better understanding of human psychology, even over scientific nonfiction, because it allows you to experience something through a character's shoes. Relating to Sensui, at this part in the story we get the reveal that he has multiple personalities, which seems like a retcon at first, but honestly Togashi covered his tracks pretty well, because Sensui does say the seven of us and Dark Angel, Gatekeeper, etc. So besides the fact that he counted himself twice, the twist actually makes some sense. Now I'm not sure if Togashi actually researched multiple personality disorder, which is now called dissociative personality disorder, but from my own research it's actually portrayed pretty accurately. DID is often caused by overwhelming trauma, which makes the mind dissociate personality traits to adapt, which is exactly what Sensui does. The personality that we've been seeing so far is Minoru, the mastermind that is in charge of the plan. The second one that comes out is Kazuya, who is the most violent and foul-mouthed out of all of them. He wields a gun and is the closer of the fights. We don't get to see every personality because only 3 of them are fighters, which is unfortunate because I wish we got to explore all of his personalities throughout the arc, and it makes it feel like Togashi really hadn't planned this twist from the start. But I'm definitely going to make a full video analyzing what we get of Sensui's personalities and diving deep into his psychology and character. The final personality that we see though is Shinobu, which is his original personality, and he's the most powerful by far, having achieved Holy Ki or Sacred Energy, which never really made sense to me. In the manga and the subbed version of the anime, it's only stated that Holy Chi is very difficult to obtain, and not even Genkai was able to achieve it. But the dub says that Sensui achieved it due to having multiple personalities to split up the different training times. But even then, only one personality can manifest at a time, and only Shinobu can use the Holy Chi. The dub does clarify that Genkai couldn't achieve it because she doesn't have the desire to make the world better, which suggests that Holy Chi is achieved from being morally pure, which is a super interesting concept because it lends credence to the idea that Sensui's DID causes him to dissociate the guilt and trauma onto the other personalities, leaving him blameless. Problem is, while Togashi had done mostly a great job at representing DID and how it creates personalities to deal with trauma, Shinobu's personality has become pretty evil as well, which kinda defeats the purpose of having the dissociation. He acts both kind and brutal at the same time. It's possible that he didn't see his own actions as wrong, and that's what matters when obtaining Holy Chi, but if he didn't have any guilt, he wouldn't need to dissociate in the first place. One thing that I credited to Toguro and Genkai's dynamic is the fact that it didn't fall into the good master, fallen student trope. But I don't hate this trope at all, and we get a dive version of it here with Koenma and Shinobu. Now technically Koenma was more like a boss to Shinobu, as Shinobu was already extremely talented and couldn't really be taught anything by Koenma. But Koenma still feels as if he failed him, because he's the one who fostered the black and white worldview that would eventually break Shinobu and cause him to become a villain. This is Koenma's peak in the story in my opinion. In the beginning of the arc he was avoiding the fact that this could be his fault, but now he accepts it and takes full responsibility. He attempts to use his pacifier that he was saving for the next dark age that has stored energy to try to seal the tunnel, Sensui and himself. It ultimately fails though because he had already spent too much energy on reviving Amanuma. It's much better at sealing demon energy away as opposed to the holy chi that Sensui has. But either way, Yusuke is completely outclassed and he knows it, and his final strategy is to mimic in reverse what Kuwabara had done in the Dark Tournament, sacrificing his life to motivate his friends. Now I already explained in the last video how I dislike how meta this is, but this time Yusuke's death hits so hard, especially the flashback scenes of Yusuke and Kuwabara's first meeting. Togashi had been putting noticeably less time in his art, but I really like the variety of his hyper-rendered to super minimalistic thin-stroke pen sketch style. In response to Yusuke's death, Kuwabara uses his dimensional sword to bust out of Itsuki's dimension, and he, Kurama, and Hiei chase Sensui through the tunnel and into the demon world, with Kuwabara even willing to cut the barrier that keeps out the high-tier demons to chase after him. Now I've loved this arc for the most part up until this point, and I think it's the best in the series, but I don't think the ending is very good. The problem is that there's a lot of things that can be considered contrived or even ass pulls in this final segment. First, let's address Yusuke's revival and sudden demon heritage. Do I think it was an ass pull? Yes. Now I don't entirely dislike the concept because this arc focuses on blurring the lines between humans and demons. In fact, as far as I can tell, in the original Japanese, yokai has a much more neutral and ambiguous meaning, like strange apparition. The kanji ma is closer to demon and is used in the demon world's name Makai and Yusuke's demon clan's name Mazoku. Strangely enough, when the kanji aku is added, it becomes more explicitly evil. Akuma is the word that is used for devil, and I think this is very important to note going forward because the claim that not all demons are evil is pretty contradictory to the meaning of demon, which is a supernatural malevolent being. But if we use the term yokai, it suddenly becomes a lot more reasonable. But still, there has been no indication of Yusuke being a Mazoku, let alone the descendant of one of the most powerful in the entire series so far. And even if this was heavily foreshadowed, suddenly just reviving the main character from death and revealing their super powerful, important lore power-up is just plot armor at its worst. The reason I excused Yusuke's power-up in the finale of the Dark Tournament arc was because that was the culmination of what had been built up through his character and other characters of the arc. And the mechanics weren't contradicting anything in the story. It wasn't greatly established, but it didn't contradict anything. The Dark Tournament power-up was a payoff for its setup, but here we have a setup at the end of the story where a payoff should be. And that really encapsulates what the weakness of this ending is. Togashi is focusing more on setting up the next arc than ending this arc satisfyingly, which is pretty strange because at this point in the series, he wanted to end the story. So I'm not sure if he was contractually obligated to write one more story arc, and he was just trying to hurry up and get to it so he can end the series as soon as possible. The final battle ensues, with Hiei, Kuwabara, and Kurama fighting Sensui in the demon plane, And Sensoi's defensive armor power-up is super ugly, honestly. As a Sensoi fan, I try to pretend this doesn't exist. Yusuke arrives and Sensoi transforms into his less ugly offensive armor, and as they're fighting, Yusuke is possessed by his demon ancestor, who takes control and finishes off Sensoi himself, much to the dismay of Yusuke. And with his dying breaths, Sensoi explains how he wished he was born as a demon. Now I think it's a bit clunky for Togashi to have his villain's motives be explained upon their deaths, which happens with both Sensoi and Toguro. I think they're well written and subtle enough characters that we can decode them for ourselves. But a really great part about these death scenes is how they use the afterlife established in the show as a way to show these characters' beliefs. Toguro's decision to not accept the grace he was given by Koenma and choose to suffer the punishment he thinks he deserves in hell serves to illustrate how self-loathing and guilt-ridden he is. But here, Itsuki chooses to take Sensui into a void dimension instead of allowing him to be taken into the afterlife and be judged by the spirit world. This world building we have with the spirit world allows Sensoi to literally reject the idea of moral judgment and good and evil, which is a great way of using your story's world to reveal a character's belief. But like I said, to decode Sensoi in depth, he'll definitely deserve his own video, but Yusuke is now left with his own decision to make. King Enma deploys the Spirit World's Special Defense Force that we've never seen before, who are all apparently A-class in strength or above. And I guess you can say that they couldn't help in the story because they were taking control of the demon plane. I mean, one of them was responsible for injuring Yoko, but they also immediately start to seal up the demon world tunnel, which kind of undermines the stakes that the story has been harping on the entire arc. But it now creates a dilemma where Yusuke can either go and find the man, his ancestor, who interrupted his fight in the demon world, or return to his friends and family back home in the human world. And I believe that this decision encapsulates the entire themes of this arc, along with the decisions that the other characters in this arc will make about their lives moving forward. The final segment of this arc says goodbye to the psychics that were introduced in this arc, and I think it's kind of a shame that we didn't get to see more of them and the use of their territories, but they give a strong thematic close to this arc. The doctor, Minoru Kamiya, ended up escaping police custody and used his abilities to change his appearance and went on to make a psychic healing dojo. And the sniper, Hagiri, goes back to school. Although he still seems to be doing shady things, from what we can gather, these two have not become better people, but they've abandoned Sensoi's ambitions. The Seaman, Mitarai, seemingly has changed his outlook completely, and that has caused him to succeed academically and be accepted in his dream school. Amanuma has returned to school as well, and he has found friends dealing with the same issues as he was. But what I think this epilogue goes to show is however valid you think Sensoi's argument is, no matter how much darkness is in the human world, there are still bits of light. It may be true that the nature of humans is in part bad, that we carry original sin or malice to us, but thinking of it as just black and white or trying to figure it all out will just suck you into a nihilistic void. As we see with our psychic characters, the best thing to do is just to put the dark segment of your life behind you and move forward with it, which I assume Togashi probably wanted to do with his manga career, but he still had to publish 22 more chapters of this series. But this is why I believe Yusuke made the right decision to stay in the human world and let go of all that lingering questions and desires, for now at least. In the next arc, Yusuke receives a summon from his ancestor in the demon world, along with Hiei and Kurama, an arc that had the most potential in the entire series. Next time we're covering the ending in the Three Kings arc.